Thank you, Ellen. Thanks to Aldevron, and it is amazing to be here for the first ever and hopefully to be continued breakthrough symposium. So it feels really great to be back. Again, as Ellen shared, that I am the one who gets to serve as the Vice President of Patient Affairs and Community Engagement for Abeona Therapeutics. And ours is a company that's clinical stage and is focused on developing potential gene and cell therapy approaches for rare diseases, life-threatening diseases. And the diseases that we're focused on currently are the recessive dystrophic form of epidermolysis bullosa, something you heard about from Drs. Porteous and Osborne yesterday, and then two different types of lysosomal storage diseases, Sanfilippo syndrome, as well as Batten disease. And so I'll be sharing a little bit more about Sanfilippo in the presentation. But what I'm really here today to talk about is how gene therapy has really, of course, advanced, but alongside, parallel to that, has been the movement of rare disease advocacy. And really, I'm here to demonstrate why the gene therapy's progress really couldn't have been as possible, as fast, without the advocacy efforts. And so with that, hopefully I'll get the right button here. Great. So as I mentioned, it's great to be back. And I really want to pay honor to the roots of my time here in North Dakota. I spent half my life, 22 years here. Began as a student at NDSU, and yes, for the students that are gathered here, this is throwback Thundar. So doing that for the alum here that are gathered. I see Tom smiling. At any rate, I also spent some time in one of the laboratories as a research associate, and I'm so thrilled to have my boss that was in the plant sciences, Michael Christoffers, who surprisingly just popped in today. So thanks for being here, Michael. So the work that I had done actually overlapped a little bit with something that Bob had talked about earlier, in that we were looking at the genetic basis for herbicide resistance in weed species, kochia and wild oats. See, I remember. But at any rate, very apropos for an institute that is focused on ag research. And you've seen in Bob's presentation, Bob Whalen's presentation as well, the old logo, and you know, really that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and it's really the place where I grew up and learned an attitude and a vision of service and of really listening and understanding what the clients need, figuring out how to provide that, how to be a problem solver. And so it's really wonderful, as I said, to be back here and just to see how Aldebaran has grown, how much cumulatively through all the different programs, all the different efforts and services that the team now has an impact on, including myself and my company. So with that, I'd like to level set everybody here. I know you heard a little bit about rare diseases yesterday, a little bit today, but just to really make sure that people understand the full impact and potential of rare disease. And so this is going to be based, or focused rather, on the US numbers, but to be called a rare disease, you have to be, there has to be a total of 200,000 individuals affected by a particular disease or less to really qualify. And so in the United States, it's an estimated 30 million individuals that are affected by a rare disease. And that equates basically to 1 in 10. So 1 in 10 individuals affected by a rare disease. Half of those are children. And of those children, 30% of them will not make it to their 5th birthday. I know we're all working to change that, of course. This is a number that's a little bit debatable, roughly 7,000 identified rare diseases. Some say more, some say a little bit less, but I'd err on the side of more, especially as we get even more with the next generation sequencing. We can identify a lot more diseases. And 80% of those diseases do have a genetic origin. And when you look at the global impact, I know Porteous talked about this yesterday a little bit, 350 million people, arguably a low number, because that's not really reaching the numbers or identifying the individuals in third world countries. And certainly, as he pointed out so well, that does not take into account the parents, the grandparents, the siblings. I have a real soft spot for the siblings, and all the others that provide support services, the educators, the healthcare providers. That does not include those circles of individuals who are also affected by a rare disease. And this information is provided by Global Genes. So, you know, as I mentioned, I'm here to share about, not necessarily belabor on the history of gene therapy. I think many people in this room especially would know about the progress that gene therapy's made. We've heard a lot about that, would know about the history even, or even the trajectory. But you know, I'm here to tie in and intertwine, as I said, how rare disease advocacy has made an impact on gene therapy. You know, in 2001, I went to my very first well, I almost said ASGCT, but that would have been ASGT. And I went with Michael, and I went with Victoria, and it was in Seattle, and I ended up getting sick partway through the trip. But at any rate, that was the first one that I attended, and I've been to every single one since then, except for one, when I was expecting one of my children. But the point being is that since 2001, and looking at this most recent ASGCT that was held in Chicago, there have been, in the earlier days, ebbs and flows, you know, excitement, you know, drawn back to, well, you know, we're still plugging along. And I gotta tell you, it's just been really exciting the last handful of years. The tone, the tenor, and just the vibe of these meetings has changed so significantly. And I remember it being especially poignant when I was sitting in a room. I was actually standing rather in the back of the room, and Jerry Mendel was presenting on his SMA data. And you could hear, you could see the shoulders of all of these brilliant scientists just shaking and moving. It was quiet because they were watching a video of a child who, one, shouldn't be alive, because children with SMA of a certain type don't make it to age 4, or age 2 rather. And this video was showing these children feeding themselves, sitting up, and miraculously climbing stairs. So yeah, it was emotional. It was an impact. And so to see and to now even be a part of the potentially transformational results that gene therapy can have is phenomenal. So we look at what the rare disease advocates have done and how they've kind of brought in more support, more effort. And so I'd like to point out, 1983, the National Organization for Rare Disorders was formed, and that was with a small group of rare disease advocates that came together, and they really wanted to combine their forces, combine their power and knowledge, and move things forward for the rare disease community. And they started by helping to get the Orphan Drug Act incentives, basically, for companies to move into rare disease research. That was signed by Reagan in 1983. And then moving on beyond that, pointing out that additional umbrella rare disease organizations such as Global Genes, as I mentioned, Every Life Foundation, which was actually started by Emil Kakkis, one of the most prominent researchers in rare disease, started in 2008 and 2009 respectively. And getting involved even at a policy level, not just awareness, but a policy level, and changing things for rare disease, those that suffer from rare disease, and those that are really trying to help and care for the individuals suffering from rare disease, such as the 21st Century Cures Act, which was signed on by Obama in late 2016. And then also with with PDUFA 6, there's language in there that really addresses how are we going to incorporate patient voice, and how are we going to move forward and more swiftly address the needs of the rare disease community. The one that I'd like to point out is actually the NORD Summit panelist. This is a really nice tie-in to gene therapy progress. So in 1990, there was a 4-year-old that was the first little girl that was treated in a gene therapy trial, viral-mediated gene therapy trial for ADA. She spoke at the NORD Summit this last month. She's in her 30s. She spoke and shared about her experiences, and I thought that was a real significant demonstration of how these two areas really do merge. And so those that are in the rare disease space talk a lot about how things really got started, talk about what it was like back in the day. And they talk about, you know, this grassroots effort and how things really started with a couple of parents, concerned families, who sat down around that kitchen table and asked the big questions. You know, how do we find one another? How do we care for the people that are affected by this disease? Where do we find the experts? What are the symptoms even? In some cases, they didn't even know the cause of the diseases. And so it's really been a significant transformation or transition from being at that kitchen table and asking those questions to now being at a place where you're really starting to share and take and show the actions. And so now you've got these individuals who were previously wondering what is the disease. Now they're writing the standards of care. Now they're assembling the patient-reported outcomes, the caregiver-reported outcomes that only they can provide, because again, rare disease, these are the experts. And so in some cases, you also hear about individuals and families who have started companies or are funding clinical trials more directly, and I have a very specific example of that. And so I think it's really amazing when you see this transition over time where you're asking those questions, and now not only have you found the answers, but you're taking action on what you found. And I think the most important lesson that the rare disease community has learned is that collectively, they can come together and have such a significant impact on all of those that are affected by rare disease by advocating and working together and making those changes. So I'd like to give some specific examples, just a few, on some groups that have done this themselves. So this is the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Diseases Association. So Tay-Sachs is an autosomal inherited disease. It's a lysosomal storage disease, and at the very beginning, the parents really didn't know, again, what the cause was. So they came together, a handful of them, started in 1967, and throughout the progress of this foundation's history, they did actually figure out how to identify and screen carriers, and they held the first mass screening in 1970. Again, as an example, they provided an actual how-to guide for caring for the individuals that have Tay-Sachs. And I think importantly, they formed in 2007 a consortium that supported the gene therapy research for Tay-Sachs and related disorders. And ironically, yesterday, they announced that GM2 is moving into the IND stages, and they've already begun vector manufacture. So that's something that this organization, this community should be very, very proud of. And a couple weeks ago, when I spoke with Sue Kahn, who's their current executive director, she again echoed how way back when, people really were trying to just find one another. This is in an era where there was not the internet, there was not Facebook or social media, whatever that flavor that you might be utilizing. So it's that much more difficult to identify someone who might know what you're walking through, what you're going through. Another example, so Hannah's Hope Fund was started by a mom. Her name's Lori Sames, and she's focused on finding a solution for giant axonal neuropathy. And so this, again, is a rare autosomal recessive disorder, and really it's a lack of a functioning etheric axon and results in just very, very swollen nerves. It's painful, progressively degrading damage to the children. They do end up wheelchair bound. And so looking at what she got started in 2008, it was a very busy year for her. She launched the foundation. She held the first ever GAN research symposium. She met a postdoc named Steve Gray. He worked in Jude Smolsky's lab. And she said, "You're my guy. I'm going to have you develop a gene therapy approach for children like Hannah." And they did. They worked together to do that, holding a pre-IND meeting in January of 2012. And notably, this would be the first spinal delivery gene therapy, so intrathecal. And were successful. They enrolled the first child in that trial in May of 2015. And what is beautiful about the individuals and the groups that work in this rare disease space is that they truly do work together and have provided now, through Hannah's Hope Fund, a catalyst for children and individuals in other diseases, and I've got a few of them listed right here. So the specific example is actually one that's near and dear to my heart and my role as the head of patient affairs at Abeona. So we originated around 2 of the 4 forms of Sanfilippo syndrome. That was technology that came out of Nationwide Children's Hospital. And it again is a lysosomal storage disorder, autosomal recessive inheritance. And this one is, it's actually quite tragic and horrific in that there's no cure, there's no treatment at this point, and it is progressive loss of skills. So you have a child who is presented to you and is seemingly healthy, and once those storage materials build up, they start to lose their skills. And so parents and families came together. Actually, this one started in particular around a young girl named Kirby Wilson from the Chicago area. She was diagnosed in 1995. And her parents, Brad and Sue, were looking around, much like I had described earlier, trying to figure out, what can we do? There surely must be something besides taking her home and loving her and helping her to enjoy and live out her last, remaining years. And so they identified Liz Neufeld, who was working at UCLA and had been one of the very few names in the publications as they poured over manuscripts and publications rather in the University of Chicago library. And so they contacted her and said, well, what should we do? What do we need to do? And she said, you know what, you need to raise money. We need funding in order to progress the research. And the particular number that she, I think, happened to throw out was, well, we need $40,000 to fund a position. And so they did. They went back home, they went back to Chicago, they raised some money. And to the number, they told me that they raised $40,000, and that funded a postdoc from Dr. Neufeld's lab who was moving to Minnesota, University of Minnesota, Dr. Hong Zhao. And being smart individuals, they wanted as many shots on goal as possible. So in addition to the University of Minnesota, they funded 2 postdocs at the University of North Carolina that were working under Dr. Munzer. And those 2 postdocs, Dr. Hai-En Fu and Dr. Doug McCarty, eventually migrated and made their way to Nationwide Children's Hospital. And that was the seed, that was the genesis, if you will, of the technology and the work that we're utilizing today. And the Wilsons, along with 11 other global foundations, were really instrumental in helping to form Abeona back in 2013. They provided insight, they provided guidance, and they provided funding. And as a private company back then, they helped to really lift our company off of the ground. And I think all would agree that they were successful in that in 2016, May of 2016, we initiated a clinical study for MPS IIIA at Columbus, Ohio, and then moved on to additional sites in Santiago de Compostela, Spain, and Adelaide, Australia. And just last year, we enrolled our first patient in the MPS IIIB trial at Columbus, Ohio. Since then, we've also opened our site at Santiago de Compostela in Spain and have plans for additional sites throughout Europe. So again, a very compelling, very detailed story of how the gene therapy progress for one particular rare disease came about because parents banded together and really pushed it forward. And so there are some things that I think are really important to really absorb and take home from all of this. And that what that is that, you know, rare disease advocacy and the progress in gene therapy, they truly do go hand in hand. As I've said, they've come of age together, and there's definitely more distance to go. But that distance is going to be covered much, much faster, much more accurately if we're working together towards a mutual goal. And that when we really think about the priorities of the few, that when we stack those together, there's a really huge cumulative overall impact that cannot be ignored. And that additionally, science is not an island. We need the input and the insight of the experts that are impacted by these diseases. And I think probably one of the more important lessons that I've learned, I've gotten to know quite a few of what I call these, the power parents, the ones that say, you know what, we hear you, we know you said that we don't have an answer, or we don't have a cure, we don't have a treatment for this, but you know, we are choosing to do otherwise. That passion can move mountains. And so I'm here, the last time rather that I was here with Aldebaran was in April of this year, and I shared a documentary that was created specifically talking about Sanfilippo syndrome, featuring some of the families and the individuals, just sharing really about the disease and what that, the impact that it's had on their family. And it also shared a little bit about the origin story that I just gave and talked to you about. But we've created a second documentary that I'm very proud of, and it's a bit more expansive in scope in that what we're really wanting to do is share, again, about the perseverance, the resilience, and really the overcoming that advocates in the rare disease space have done, but also what we've seen here in gene therapy. So I'd love to play that now for you, if I could.
Biking's always been in my life, but 2 or 3 years after he passed away, that's when it slowly evolved. It said, this is something I can have anger with, this is something I can cry, this is something I can do. And it just became my outlet to try to cope with the death of Drakey.
Carl, was on a quest. And that quest was to try and find a cure for children with Sanfilippo. And through that journey, we went up Mount Rainier, bringing awareness of rare disease and how you develop therapies. And so we thought, what else could we do? So we decided to climb higher. And Carl found us another mountain to climb. We thought this would be a great quest for us to continue the story.
I'm doing this for my children. I'm doing this for all these children with these rare diseases, to give them a chance at life, to give them hope and get people's attention of how far a parent would go to try and save their children's lives.
You kind of have this question, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you tackle 7,000 rare diseases? One disease at a time.
We wouldn't sit and watch. We couldn't live and wait. We had to live in hope. And hope meant we were going to fight. And we were going to fight hard.
It's not about Drake, it's not about me, it's about doing the right thing. It's about doing it because you can. You can try. It's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try, as long as there's hope. That's the most important thing to me. These families have to have hope.
You can live for a month without food and a week without water, but you can't live a day without hope.
Oops, going the wrong way. Got excited. All right, so before I take questions, I do want to take a moment and just say congratulations to Aldevron, to Michael, to John, to the whole team that they have brought on for 20 years of impact, of innovation, of just driving things forward. As I said, it's great to be back. I'm very proud of the small role that I had in helping to kind of spark some of this. And I am so excited to walk through that facility yesterday and just see the physical manifestation of what I know was a dream that started many years ago. So yeah, congratulations, happy birthday, and happy birthday, Michael. I don't know if I can see where you are, but happy birthday.
Thank you, Michelle, very much. I do have to ask, because I think everybody saw your face in that video with a couple of walking sticks, and forgive me, an exasperated look on your face. I don't know what altitude you were at the time, but can you share that story of what you were doing?
Sure. So that was this past March. Climbed with Team Sanfilippo. So we really put our money where our mouth is, right? We're not just helping to develop therapies. We're really trying to climb that mountain together, quite literally. So I went with a team of a total of 8, and we went up Pico de Orizaba. Actually, we went up 2 mountains, but Pico de Orizaba, 18,500 feet in altitude. And it's the 3rd highest summit in North America. And so that was probably one of the most amazing things I've ever done and one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I joked with them, but it was actually true, that Fargo prepared me for the climb, because I got to the top and the wind chill was, I don't know, must have been like 20, 30 below or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, this feels like the plane, yeah. Like I got the cold, I don't know about that. So yeah, that's what that was about.
Wow. I mean, like you said, it's putting your money where your mouth is. It's very impressive, very impressive. So I'm going to start a second question, and I'd like anyone who has one. I know we have some new people in the audience. You can see James standing over there. We've got a microphone right there and another one on this side, so you're welcome to stand up and ask Michelle any questions you may have. But knowing that you've shared your background with Aldebaran, where you were on one side of the cures, now you're on the other side. How did Aldebaran prepare you to be in this new space of being such a patient advocate?
Sure. I think a lot of the lessons that I learned at Aldebaran are absolutely essential to the work that I do now in this role as patient affairs, and most of which would be listening, really seeking to understand, and understanding not just where an individual is at or a group is at, but how to kind of come in at that space and at that place and help bring them to wherever it is that they need to go, help them understand. Gene therapy is a big concept. I mean, I would say a lot of us are still, trying to keep up with the technology advances. Think about being a parent who has a child that's just been diagnosed, and you're a school teacher, or maybe, a mechanic like my dad, and, you gotta now understand what this rare disease is and all the medical terminology that comes with it. You've got to now figure out, well, what's an IEP, and what do I do with my public school to figure that out? And so being able to come in and converse and help give them the information that they need at that level is critical. And I also think, too, that, as I mentioned, I'm very proud of the work that I was able to do with Aldevron, and I still am. It's this stacking, if you will, this cumulative effect, and now there's all these different diseases or these different diagnostics that you're helping to develop and progress, and you stack all of those up, and that's a huge amount of impact. But you don't get as surface, or excuse me, you stay at a certain surface level because there's so much that's happening. You hear how much impact Aldevron has. It's hard to keep up on just what goes and what lies deeper. And I think that was one of the things I craved to understand, the deeper, and now I'm full on in that, in understanding that.
Have you found any perceptions people might have in the rare disease or just general public space about gene therapy? I mean, are there any perceptions?
I think, if I could share, I think that we really do need to do a more deliberate job, or a better job at some of the nomenclature, some of the terminology, because it's a little confusing. Is it gene medicine? Is it gene editing? Is it genetic manipulation, recombinant DNA technology, gene therapy, what have you? It's really overwhelming, like I said, to individuals who are dealing with so much already, that I think we need to really work at serving it up a little bit. And some of the perceptions are ranging from it's a one-shot cure, we're saved forever, to, it's going to cause cancer, and it's synonymous with genetically modified foods that are going to grow horns out of your head. So it's really a spectrum, like many things, but I think we can own that. We can help define that a little bit better, a lot better, and really reduce that confusion.
James, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. It's always a great talk. I was wondering about the interactions with regulatory agencies. I think it's fair to say that patient advocacy groups and the FDA haven't always been on the same page, and patient groups are very motivated to get their potential cures approved and out there, and the FDA has to take a more conservative view at times. So what's the general interaction? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What can the industry do to help?
So it's actually getting a lot better. So we talk about patient voice, patient centricity, and all of those things. Those are significantly important, and especially as I was describing, in rare disease, these are the experts. They know their disease like nobody else because they live with it 24/7. So the FDA, and through, I think I made reference to 21st Century Cures Act, PDUFA 6, they actually have language now where there's a mandate to incorporate that patient voice, if you will, and they're doing that through patient-focused drug development engagements where I recently attended one for epidermolysis bullosa, and it was an externally led, and what that means is that is an opportunity for the patient community, in this case the epidermolysis bullosa community, to share about the burden of disease, what their expectations are for, if there were a change to happen, a cure, if you will, or some kind of therapy, what would their expectations be? What would they want? What's going to make an impact to their daily life, quality of life? And so at this April 6th externally led PFDD, there was an unprecedented 42 members from the agency that showed up. And across, CBER, and not just the orphan drug division, as you might expect. And interestingly, probably not coincidentally, 2 months later, there was a disease-specific guidance issued by the FDA on EB. And so I've shared this with my colleagues too. The last probably half a year or so, when I've gone to the different patient community-specific meetings, like the EB Deborah Care Conference, the MPS International MPS Symposium, Batten Disease Conference, there has been someone either dialing in and presenting, or someone standing on stage from the FDA talking about all of the initiatives and all the things that they're doing to try to bring in that patient perspective. And that's incredible. And they end every presentation with, here's my phone number, here's my email address, use it. And patient groups are definitely using that.
We have one. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for a very inspiring talk. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about getting things on the newborn screening panel and some of the challenges. I don't know too much, but from what I understand, it's very fragmented at the state level, and it seems like given the state of technology, we should be able to do a better job at screening for a whole host of diseases.
Yeah, it's actually ironic. So we have something at the federal level, and you're right, and I'll get to the state level, but at the federal level, it's something called the RUSP. It's the Recommended User Screening Panel, I believe. I'm not sure if I got all the acronym fully spelled out, but what that is, it's a recommendation at the federal level to add something to the newborn screening panel, and I think there are like 39 or so currently on the RUSP. It's a very significantly long process to even get to that place. And once a disease does get added to the RUSP, that's not, that's not it. So as you indicated, we have to go state by state. And each state has different laws for incorporation. Some don't really have anything on the books at all, and some, even if they have a time frame with which they have to incorporate said test into newborn screening, that they might not have funding for it. And so it's a significant challenge, and ironically, the whole idea of the RUSP was to make sure that there was some level of consistency or some pathway state to state, because now we're kind of at this place where, again, rare disease advocates are taking this on, and they're really challenging this slow and burdensome process. And now you're starting to see things that are on a screening panel, but they're not part of the RUSP screening panel. They're not part of that group necessarily. So it's a big challenge, and it's one of those kind of, you're right, to your point, we can and we should be doing better. Yeah, thanks.
All right, last call. Thank you, Michelle, very much.
Thank you.